Well, good morning. This is your devotions for Thursday, March 26th. Already, this will be the fourth day of school back as we start with the distance learning. And we're going to read from our devotions today from Psalm 71, 15 through 18. So if you get your Bibles ready, but while you're doing that, I'll let you know of a couple things. Today, we are having our spelling pretest. So if you need to have that ready, the pretest that you had, pretest sheet that's in your envelope packet. And then you should be able to have that ready for the interactive class, because the interactive class is when we're going to do it. Now, if you happen to miss this video, then you will, if you don't see this, watch this video first, then you might forget that we're having it at the interactive class time. Especially those in fifth grade. I did remind the sixth graders. I thought I reminded the fifth graders, but I'm not sure if it was today or yesterday. But that's when we're going to do the pretest for spelling. And so get yourselves ready for that. Hopefully you've studied ahead of time. I will be kind, and I will let you miss 3 and get 100 on the pretest, and there will be no number 21 and 22 this time. Now, as we go on and we keep doing this, we'll probably change that a little bit and make it a little bit more work for you, but for right now we'll just leave it right there. But Psalm 71 verse 15 through 18 says this: My mouth shall show forth thy righteousness and thy salvation all the day, for I know not the numbers thereof. I will go in the strength of the Lord God. I will make mention of thy righteousness, even of thine only. O God, thou hast taught me from my youth, and hitherto have I declared thy wondrous works. Now also, when I am old and gray-headed, O God, forsake me not, until I have showed thy strength unto this generation, and thy power to everyone that is to come. That last verse there, I'm not gray-headed, I'm more, well, I guess gray-haired would be what that would match, and I'm more no-haired or losing-haired. But as far as here, what he's talking about is age and experience and not much time left in his life. And he's saying for God to not forsake him. Don't forsake him just because he's older or just because he's at an upper age. And he says, until I've shown my strength to this or your strength to this generation. So I think probably every teacher that's a Christian school teacher and any Christian who's living for the Lord would like to see that happen to this generation that is currently here. Being disciplined does not make a person spiritual, doesn't make them close to the Lord. Because you are a disciplined person, because you are in control of your habits or in control of your, or you do all the right things, you don't do any of the wrong things, that doesn't make you spiritual. That could be the result of somebody who is spiritual, but that doesn't make you that way. And I think that a lot of times what we forget about is that we think that doing things is really what makes God happy. Now, and don't misunderstand me. You shouldn't do something wrong because it doesn't matter to God. That's not the case at all. Doing something right to please the Lord is the right thing to do. But just doing that thing, checking off a list of these things that you would do that would be good, that would be right things to do, that's not really the way that God would desire us to live, to say, oh, I did all these right things, now I can go do whatever I want because I did all the good things. And it should be to the effect that what he talked about with the Pharisees. You remember he talked about the Pharisees. He said the Pharisees, they tithe on their mint, on their anise, which are basically little spices that they have. And so those spices, they would tithe, they would get a certain amount of spice, and they'd take 1/10 of it, and they would give it to the temple. And that takes a lot of work to do that. That takes a lot of effort to make sure that is separated in that way. But what he said then afterward to them was that he says, but you should have worried about the weightier things of the law, the things that are important, like taking care of the poor, taking care of the sick, and showing love to other people, and the things that went along with what they should have done. But they were all worried about keeping the law in certain respects, but not in the things that were important to God. And he said they should have done that and done those other things where they kept the law as far as 10% of everything. Because if they had done the other things first, then they would have had that heart for God. They would have had that desire to live for him. They would have had that desire to please Him. And as you guys will read in Bible this morning, you want to, as we read our Forbidden Gates, you'll find a good example of a written story. It's not real, but it shows a good example of how a Christian should be and how they should be thinking, what their mind should be on as far as the way that they're living for God, and the examples of the characters that are in that story. And so that's kind of the idea of what I want to emphasize here as far as in that verse. In verse 17 it says, "O God, thou hast taught me from my youth, and hitherto have I declared thy wondrous works." Now, I'm not sure how to get this across, but you as a young person, you as a child who is not, you're not on your own yet. You are under your parents' direction, under your parents' control. You have a great opportunity to learn, but you also have a great opportunity to focus on the wrong things. Because you don't have to work for a living, because you don't have to do anything to be taken care of. You are just taken care of by your parents. None of you have to pay your mom and dad for the food that they give you, as if you were going to a restaurant. None of you have to pay rent in order to live in the room that you live in. And most all of you, I would say probably all of you, are blessed in a great way to be with your mom and dad and to be a part of their family. And that's what family is about. Now, I suggest, and if any parents are listening to this, I suggest all the time to the students, because that's one of the reasons I give them jobs in the room, aside from the fact that I don't have the time to do it all, but it teaches the students' responsibility to have these jobs. And I would suggest that if they don't have chores to do, or if they only have a few, that you might give them a few more. They're getting older now, especially in 5th and 6th grade. They should be more responsible enough to be able to do some of these things. And I've given them some practice. And it's a good thing for them to do as a part of the family, as a part of your family. They should be able to learn to be responsible for what they are doing and for what they are living there with, and how they're a part of that family. They're not to be served in that family. You're not their servants. They're not your servants, of course, either, but you are in leadership, and you are training them to be adults once they get out of the house. And so it might be a good idea, and maybe you do this already, it's very possible, that they have to do chores in the house, that they're responsible for certain things, because you're trying to teach them to be a part of the family that God has placed them in, and that being a part of that family requires some responsibilities. That's the same thing for being a part of God's family as well. There are responsibilities God has given us as being a part of His family that we need to accomplish or do in our lives on a regular basis, aside from living or each day reading His Word and praying and spending time with God. That's the enjoyable time, should be the enjoyable time. But the thing that we should be doing in that is that we should really be living in a way that it is showing that we are a part of God's family. And what does God want? Well, what do your parents want? Your parents want you to clean your room, so you clean your room. That may be a chore that they've given you. You know that your parents want you to take out the trash when it's full, and so you don't need to be told, because they've told you already, and you're supposed to do that. Well, God has some expectations from us as well. He expects us to live for Him. He expects us to tell others about Him. He expects us to pray in situations, whether it's a good or bad situation. He expects us to thank Him for things. A lot of these expectations that are written in the Bible, we think, oh, I don't feel like doing that. No, I don't want to do that. That's boring. And many times we think about that with our jobs at home. But really, parents are teaching us to respond the same way with the right attitude. If I had my own child and I told that child, take out the trash, this is your responsibility. In our family, this is what you're supposed to do each day. It's not hard to do. Just make sure you do it. Make sure it gets done, because otherwise it starts to build up and it starts to stink in the house. And so that person has that responsibility. And if they decide, they do it, but they're dragging their feet and they're complaining about it the whole time as they're taking it outside, and I can't believe I have to do this, isn't fair, and all those things that come with that. If that's the attitude, then they're really not doing it with the right attitude. Now, God has patience with us, and our parents have patience with us, and sometimes we have a tendency to forget about that patience that they're having with us, because we can be stinky people. All of us can be. To God, to our husbands and wives, for those that are married, to our children, even sometimes parents can be, and many times children can be to their parents and to their brothers and sisters and to their teachers and to their pastors and to their anybody else that they can meet, and family, friends, neighbors. And we've got to understand that we need to have God's attitude. God does not have that attitude. He accepts responsibility. Jesus accepted the responsibility of going to the cross. And as difficult as that was, he had that responsibility. And that responsibility drove him in his whole entire life to do what was right and to please him in everything that he did. All right, so this is called Lessons from the Garden. I enjoy gardening. Still haven't gotten the chance to plant my seeds yet for my jalapenos, but hopefully I'll be able to do that maybe this weekend. Lessons from the Garden. Keith, Heather, and Kenny had enjoyed watching the spring flowers unfold their pretty petals. The kids had learned the names of the different flowers in Mom's garden, and each had a favorite. "I love the hyacinths, Mom," said Heather as they looked at the flowers one day. "They're the best." 4-year-old Kenny had a different opinion. "I like the yellow daffodils," he said. "My favorites are the tulips," declared Keith. "They have so many different colors. They're not all the same." Mom smiled. "How about the crocuses?" she asked. "I always think they look so brave peeking out at the early morning frosts." "But some of the flowers are dying. What happens to them when they die, Mommy?" asked Kenny with a sad look on his face. "Will they come up again sometime?" Mom nodded. "They'll be back next year," she assured him, "and they will have multiplied." "Multiplied?" asked Kenny. "What's that mean?" "It's multiplied, not multiplied," corrected Keith. Apparently that's what he said, multiplied. "That means the bulb in the ground will make more of its kind of flowers for you to see next spring, doesn't it, Mom?" "That's right," replied Mom. I was just thinking that the pretty spring flowers are an example of how Christians should be. We should bloom for Jesus. Our life should be beautiful. And just as the flowers multiply, Christians should multiply. By our example and by our words, we should be bringing others to Jesus so they, too, can start a new life that is beautiful. Kenny bent over to look more closely at a bright yellow daffodil. "I wonder how many new flowers there will be next spring," he said. "Yeah," Heather nodded thoughtfully. "And how many new Christians?" Well, that story was focused very much on reaching out and telling others about Christ, and to show forth his righteousness to others, to show forth his strength. And as verse 18 says, to show his strength, God's strength. And he's talking to God here. He says, "O God, forsake me not until I have showed thy strength unto this generation and thy power to everyone that is to come." I hope that's an encouragement to you, and hopefully that's the way you live your life. Now, we're sort of in a situation now where we really can't do that. But I wonder if you encourage your brothers and sisters, if you encourage them or you discourage them through your attitude. Do you get upset and angry and show how you're displeased with something, but then when you do something wrong, you don't admit it, you're not willing to say that you did something wrong? Well, that can be discouraging to your brother and sister, and that can be discouraging to your friends and your cousins. It can show them that they are, or that they can say to them that living for God doesn't really matter in your life. Now, that's probably not true, because we all have that sin nature in us, and it can cause us difficulties. But remember, each day is a new day. Each time we do something, somebody's watching us. Not just God. I'm talking about other people are watching us. Other people are trying to see how we are with our relationship with God, and that will affect them as well. I hope that was helpful for you today. Enjoy your classes as you go through today. Some of you are starting to get a little bit more disciplined about it, and I appreciate that. And make sure that you're getting your quizzes and things into me, your tests, trying to get them as graded and back to you as fast as possible. Sometimes when I'm home, by the way, if you don't mind, probably, if possible, not calling back after 8 or texting me after 8. Nobody's really called me after 8, but texting me, if possible, after 8 o'clock, that would be great. If you have to, I understand, it's not a problem. I might not answer right away, though, because I might not see it at the time because I turn my phone off. But in the meantime, do your best, live for the Lord, do what you can to serve Him and to show others who it is that you really serve.